The mix-up. The last place Sarah Chen wanted to be was handcuffed to a 7-foot-tall alien with obsidian horns and an attitude problem. Yet here she was, stuck to First Guardian cracks, while Omega Station's evacuation sirens wailed overhead. If you just listened to me 5 minutes ago, human, we wouldn't be in this situation. Cracks growled, his scaled tail lashing behind him in agitation. The iridescent black scales along his neck flared, catching the emergency lighting in ways that would have been beautiful if Sarah wasn't so furious. Listen to you. You're the one who tried to arrest me in the middle of a diplomatic conference. Sarah yanked at the energy cuffs binding their wrists together, earning nothing but a painful buzz for her efforts. I was giving a presentation on human-drachnid trade relations when your security team burst in. A presentation that coincidentally preceded 3 separate systems failures in critical areas. Carax's golden eyes narrowed to slits. You're the only new variable in this station's equation, Ambassador Chen. The station shuddered around them, and Sarah stumbled against Carax's armored chest. His free hand steadied her automatically, and she jerked away as if burned. And you're the head of station security, who's had access to everything that's been sabotage. Funny how that works. Another tremor rocked the station. The lights flickered ominously, and the evacuation siren's pitch changed to something more urgent. Carax's horns gleamed as he looked up at the ceiling, his expression shifting from irritation to genuine concern. That's the containment warning, he said, all pretense of interrogation gone from his voice. We need to move. Now. What about the cuffs? No time. The quantum core is destabilizing. He started running, forcing Sarah to match his stride or be dragged along. If we don't reach the emergency shelters in the next 10 minutes, we'll have bigger problems than being handcuffed together. They sprinted through corridors that were rapidly emptying of personnel. Sarah's diplomatic training hadn't prepared her for running in formal wear, but she managed to keep pace with Carax's longer strides. Her mind raced faster than her feet. A quantum core destabilization wasn't just unlikely. It was practically impossible without deliberate tampering. Wait, she gasped as they rounded a corner. The core has triple redundancies. This can't be an accident. Carax's stride hitched for just a moment. Finally, something we agree on. So either I'm the worst saboteur in history, running toward danger while handcuffed to the head of security, or I'm an equally incompetent conspirator, bound to the very diplomat I'm supposedly trying to frame. Carax finished her thought. They reached a sealed pressure door, and Carax pressed his free hand to the security panel. Nothing happened. He tried again, then snarled a curse in his native tongue that Sarah's translator didn't bother to process. The security systems are locked out, he said, horns casting sharp shadows in the emergency lighting. Someone's overridden my credentials. Sarah reached for the panel with her free hand. Try it with both of us. My diplomatic codes plus your security access. If someone's trying to frame both of us. They wouldn't expect us to work together. Carax nodded. Their joined hands reached for the panel alongside their free ones, and for a moment, Sarah was intensely aware of how the scales on his fingers caught the light. The door slid open with a hydraulic hiss. Ha! Sarah's triumph was short-lived as klaxons began blaring from the other side. Please tell me that's not what I think it is. Carax's expression was grim. Atmospheric decompression warning. Someone's trying to space this entire section. His eyes met hers. Ambassador Chen. Sarah. I believe we may have been played. You think? She was already scanning the corridor for options. There. Maintenance shaft. We can reach the lower levels through the service tunnels. If we survive, I'm going to find whoever did this and show them exactly why drachnids were once the most feared warriors in the galaxy. Sarah managed a tight smile as they ran for the access panel. If we survive, I'll help you. And Carax, call me Sarah. If we're going to die together, we might as well be on a first-name basis. They reached the maintenance shaft just as the first decompression sequences began. As they climbed down into the darkness, Sarah couldn't help but think that of all the ways she'd imagined this diplomatic mission going wrong, being handcuffed to an increasingly intriguing Drachnid security chief hadn't even made the list. At least things couldn't get worse. The station's lights went out completely, plunging them into darkness broken only by the bioluminescent markings along Krax's horns. "You know," Krax's voice came from the darkness, closer than she'd expected. "On my world, this would almost qualify as a first date." "Your people have very strange courtship rituals," Sarah replied, trying not to think about how the soft glow from his horns highlighted the sharp angles of his face. "Says the species that thinks dinner and moving pictures is the height of romance." Despite everything, Sarah found herself fighting back a smile. "If we survive this, maybe we can debate cultural differences over dinner. Is that an invitation, Ambassador?" Before Sarah could respond, something exploded above them, and the real chaos began. Forced alliance. The maintenance shaft echoed with the sound of twisting metal as another explosion rocked Omega Station. Sarah's fingers slipped on the rungs, but Krax's quick reflexes and their bound hands kept her from falling. "Thanks," she gasped, heart hammering against her ribs. "Though I'm starting to think someone really wants us dead." An astute observation. Krax's bioluminescent horns cast eerie patterns on the shaft walls. "The question is, why frame us both? Drachnid-human relations have been improving. Maybe that's exactly why." Sarah paused as they reached a junction. Some parties profit from conflict, left or right. Krax cocked his head, horns tilting as he listened. "Left. There's air movement from that direction. Likely connects to the secondary life support hub." His golden eyes narrowed. "You seem well informed about station layouts for a diplomat. And you're surprisingly versed in political economics for a security chief." Sarah matched his suspicious look with one of her own. "We all have our depths, Krax." They climbed in silence for several minutes, the only sound their breathing and the distant groans of the damaged station. Sarah's formal diplomatic attire was a mess, and she could feel blisters forming on her palms. Krax moved with a predator's grace despite the awkward positioning required by their bound hands. The shaft opened into a maintenance bay, filled with humming life support equipment. Krax helped Sarah down, their handcuffed hands creating an awkward dance of movement that ended with her pressed against his armored chest. His scales were warm. "Sorry," they said simultaneously, then quickly separated as much as the cuffs allowed. Sarah brushed herself off with her free hand, trying to look anywhere but at Krax. "Right. We need to access the station's logs. Figure out who had the capability to orchestrate this." "Agreed. But first," Krax reached into a compartment on his utility belt and pulled out a small device. "We should do something about these cuffs." "You had a key this entire time." "Not a key. A scanner. These cuffs are quantum locked. Standard issue supposedly can't be broken without the original encoder." His mandibles clicked in what Sarah was beginning to recognize as amusement. But they were never tested against Drachnid bone density. Sarah watched as he positioned the scanner. "You're going to break them. Won't that hurt?" "Considerably. But it's better than staying bound to a human who smells like vanilla and conspiracy." "I do not smell like." Sarah's protest was cut short as Krax jerked their bound hands apart with explosive force. Instead of breaking, the cuffs pulsed with brilliant energy that sent them both to their knees. "Interesting." Krax growled through obvious pain. "They've been modified. The energy signature is familiar." "Cerulean tech," Sarah finished, shaking out her tingling arm. "Which means this goes higher than station politics." Krax helped her up, his scaled hand lingering on her arm. "The Ceruleans are supposed to be neutral mediators. If they're involved." A soft beep interrupted them. One of the life support consoles had come alive, displaying a message that made Sarah's blood run cold. "Diplomatic Orcs. Compromise et. Trust no one. Find DEQUNTUM Sci-Fi. A friend of yours?" Krax asked, horns flaring with interest. Maybe. Or another trap. Sarah approached the console. But M could be Marshall Martinez. She recruited me, warned me something was wrong in the course. She began typing, her fingers flying over the holographic keys. The question is, why tell us about the cipher? Because the quantum cipher is mythical tech, Crax said, supposedly developed by the Ceruleans centuries ago. Perfect encryption, perfect data storage. If someone's using it for sabotage, they could corrupt any system, plant any evidence, and no one would be able to prove it wasn't genuine. Sarah's fingers stilled. We need to find it. We. Crax's expression was unreadable. A moment ago, you thought I was a saboteur. Sarah met his gaze. You had multiple chances to let me fall to my death. You haven't. Also, she gestured at their still-bound hands. Not like I have much choice in my company. Before Crax could respond, the station's eye spoke, its usual smooth tones replaced by static. Warning. Unauthorized access detected in Life Support Hub 7B, initiating containment protocols. Please tell me this isn't another decompression sequence, Sarah said. Crax was already moving, pulling her toward a sealed door. Worse. Hub 7B connects to the primary coolant systems. Meaning? Meaning in about 30 seconds, this room is going to become hot enough to vaporize carbon-based life forms. He slammed his security codes into the door panel. Nothing happened. And someone really doesn't want us looking at those console logs. Sarah reached for the panel with her free hand, adding her diplomatic override. Still nothing. The room's temperature began to rise. Crax. Sarah tried to keep her voice steady. Remember how you said these cuffs were never tested against drachnid bone density? He looked at her, then at the reinforced maintenance door, and his mandibles clicked in what might have been a smile. Ambassador Chen, are you suggesting we do something reckless and potentially painful? I'm suggesting we use your supposedly superior drachnid strength to swing me into that door with enough force to trigger its emergency release. She was already moving into position. Unless you have a better idea. The temperature climbed higher. A warning light began to flash. Just one question, Crax said as he braced himself. If we survive this, does it count as a second date? Sarah's laughter was cut short as he spun them both, using their bound hands as a pivot point. The world blurred, and then there was nothing but impact, pain, and the blessed sound of an emergency release triggering. They tumbled through the doorway just as superheated steam filled the room behind them. Sarah landed on top of Crax, both of them breathing hard. His horns were glowing brighter than usual, and she could feel his heart hammering where her hand pressed against his chest. For the record, she managed between breaths. This is the worst first date I've ever had. Crax's laugh rumbled through his chest. Then you've been dating the wrong species, Ambassador. A distant explosion reminded them of their situation. Sarah rolled off Crax, helping him up with their bound hands. The console said to trust no one, she said as they started running again. But I'm starting to think you might be the exception. Likewise, Crax replied. Though if you tell anyone I said that, I'll deny it. They rounded a corner and found themselves facing a squad of security drones. All weapons pointed their way. Speaking of trust, Crax said quietly, I hope you're as good at improvising as you are at breaking down doors. The drones' targeting lasers painted red dots across their chests as Sarah smiled grimly. Guess we're about to find out. Trust falls. The security drones' targeting systems hummed with deadly promise. Sarah felt Crax tense beside her, his scales shifting with a soft whisper of movement. 8 drones, he murmured. Cerulean make, latest model. They're not supposed to be on this station. Any weaknesses? The targeting matrix can't compensate for sudden changes in gravity. Sarah's free hand was already moving toward her earring. Good thing I never go to diplomatic functions without insurance. She pulled the small device free. Ambassador's emergency gravity modulator. For quick exits from uncomfortable situations. Crax's mandibles twitched. and they called Drachnids paranoid. The drones advanced in perfect formation. A mechanical voice echoed through the corridor. Targets identified. Termination protocols engage. Quick question, Sarah whispered. Can Drachnids land on their feet? Natural predator instincts. Why? Sarah activated the modulator. The world turned sideways as artificial gravity reversed. The drones, programmed for standard gravitational conditions, sprayed laser fire in wild arcs as their targeting systems failed. Cracks grabbed Sarah with both their bound and free hands, twisting in midair to absorb the impact as they hit what had been the ceiling. 3 seconds until they recalibrate, he said. Sarah was already moving, using their momentum and Cracks' strength to swing herself feet first into the nearest drone. It shattered satisfyingly, and she grabbed its weapon before it could float away. Here's hoping diplomatic combat training wasn't a waste of time. Together, they made short work of the remaining drones. Sarah's zero-gravity marksmanship paired surprisingly well with Carax's close combat expertise, their handcuffed hands forcing them to move in perfect synchronization. When the last drone fell, they found themselves face to face, breathing hard. That, Carax said, his golden eyes bright with something that might have been admiration, was not standard diplomatic training. And that wasn't standard security chief combat. Sarah holstered the drone's weapon at her hip. Special Forces, Royal Guard. Before I decided station security might be less political. His horns dimmed slightly. I was wrong about that. The gravity modulator beeped a warning. Brace yourself, Sarah said, and then they were falling again. This time, Carax landed first, catching her against his chest with surprising gentleness. For a moment, neither moved. Sarah could feel the warmth of his scales through her torn diplomatic uniform, could see the intricate patterns where bioluminescence traced paths along his horns. This close, she noticed his scales had a subtle iridescence, like oil on water. A distant explosion broke the moment. Carax helped her up, though their handcuffed hands meant they couldn't step too far apart. The quantum cipher, he said, all business again. If it exists, where would it be? Sarah ran her free hand through her disheveled hair. The message came through life support systems. But that doesn't make sense. Why hide something so valuable in such an accessible area? Unless... Carax's horns brightened with sudden understanding. What's the one place on a station this size that everyone takes for granted? The one system no one ever really looks at. The atmospheric recyclers, Sarah breathed. They're everywhere, completely automated, and connected to every part of the station. Carax was already moving, pulling up a holographic map with his free hand. There's a primary recycling hub 2 levels down. If I were hiding something I wanted to keep hidden in plain sight. They made their way through maintenance tunnels and service corridors, avoiding the main passageways where more drones might lurk. The handcuffs made climbing difficult, but they developed an awkward rhythm that mostly worked. So, Sarah said during a particularly precarious ladder descent, Royal Guard, I'm trying to picture you in formal ceremonial armor. Better than picturing me in whatever that diplomatic uniform used to be before we started destroying station property. Hey, this was kosher. And I like this outfit. Carax helped her down the last few rungs, his scaled hands careful despite their strength. The color brings out your eyes, he said, then seemed to realize what he'd said, and quickly looked away. Sarah felt her cheeks warm. I thank you. Your horns are pretty too. When they glow. Not that I've been paying attention to. A soft click echoed through the maintenance shaft. They both froze. Please tell me that was your stomach, Sarah whispered. Motion sensors, Carax replied grimly. Very old ones. The kind that don't show up on modern scans because everyone assumes they've been deactivated. And we just triggered them. Yes. And they're probably connected to something unpleasant. Almost certainly. The walls began to move, panels sliding apart to reveal darkness beyond. A sweet, cloying smell filled the air. Neurotoxin, Carax said, pulling Sarah close. Old cerulean badge. Attacks the nervous system, causes hallucinations before death. He reached for his utility belt with his free hand. I have one rebreather. Sarah looked at the rapidly shrinking safe space around them, then at Cracks. We can share, if we're close enough. His eyes met hers. Very close. Well, she said, trying to ignore how her heart was racing for reasons that had nothing to do with mortal danger. We're already handcuffed together. What's a little shared breathing between conspirators? Cracks activated the rebreather, and Sarah stepped into his space. He was warm, his scales smooth against her skin as they pressed together, sharing the limited clean air between them. His free arm wrapped around her waist, keeping her steady as the toxin swirled around them. Just so you know, Sarah murmured against his chest, if the hallucinations start, and I say anything embarrassing about how attractive you find my horns, I will end you. His laugh rumbled through his chest. Noted, Ambassador. They stayed like that, breathing in tandem, until the toxin dispersed. Neither immediately moved away. Cracks. Yes, I think I know where the cipher is. Sarah pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. But you're really not going to like it. His horns pulsed with curiosity. Try me. Remember how you said these cuffs had cerulean energy signatures? She held up their bound hands. What if we're literally carrying it? Karak stared at the cuffs, then at her. You think? The perfect hiding place. Who would think to check restraints? She was getting excited now, the pieces falling into place. That's why they won't break. They're not just cuffs. They're quantum storage devices. And that's why someone wanted the station's most suspicious security chief to arrest its newest diplomat. Carax's free hand moved to the cuffs, tracing the intricate patterns they both dismissed as decorative. Keep us distracted with suspecting each other while they... A new alarm began to sound, different from the others. Carax's horns flared bright with recognition. What? Sarah asked. What is it? That's the station's core going critical. For real this time. His eyes met hers. We have 10 minutes before this whole sector explodes. Sarah tightened her grip on his hand. Then I guess we better figure out how to hack a quantum cipher in 9 minutes or less. Or we could try my original plan. Which is? Carax grinned, showing teeth that reminded her he was, after all, a predator species. We find who did this and throw them out an airlock. Despite everything, Sarah found herself grinning back. See, this is why we make such a good team. They ran toward the sound of explosions, bound together by more than just quantum-locked handcuffs, while behind them, Omega Station's core began its final countdown. Breaking point. The station's core warning blared through every speaker, a countdown to catastrophe punctuated by distant explosions. Sarah and Carax raced through maintenance tunnels toward central control, their bound hands now more coordination than hindrance. 8 minutes to core breach. The station AI announced pleasantly. The cuffs are warm, Sarah noted as they ran. Her stolen drone weapon bumped against her hip. They've been getting warmer since we figured out what they are. Carax's horns pulsed with agitation. The cipher must be reacting to the station's instability. If the core goes, the quantum data inside these cuffs could be lost forever. Sarah finished, along with everyone on this station. She pulled them to a stop. Carax, wait, why aren't there any evacuation pods launching? His golden eyes widened. Because someone doesn't want witnesses. He brought up a holographic station schematic with his free hand. Central Control's lockdown protocols are still active. No one can leave without override authorization. How many people are still on board? At least 300. His scaled jaw tightened. Mostly maintenance crews, service workers, people no one important would miss. Sarah felt cold despite the station's rising temperature. We need to split up. We're handcuffed. Exactly. She held up their bound hands. These cuffs contain what everyone's fighting over. If we can separate them, they'll have to divide their forces. Carax studied her face. You want to break the quantum lock. Can your bone density handle it now that we know what we're dealing with? Instead of answering, Krax pulled her closer, his free hand coming up to cup her face. For a wild moment, Sarah thought he was going to kiss her. Instead, he pressed his forehead to hers, his horns dimming to a soft glow. "This is going to hurt," he said quietly. "A lot." Sarah placed her free hand over his. "I trust you." He pulled back, surprise flickering across his features. Then his expression hardened with determination. "On three? On three. 1. Sarah braced herself. 2. Their eyes met. 3. They pulled in opposite directions. Pain lanced up Sarah's arm as the quantum lock fought their separation. Krax's scales flared with effort, his natural armor glowing as the cuff's energy discharged through them both. With a sound like breaking glass, the cuffs split. They stumbled apart, each now wearing half of a broken quantum lock. Data streamed across the surfaces in impossible patterns. 6 minutes to core breach. "The evacuation controls are through there." Krax pointed down one corridor, still breathing hard. "Central control is that way." He nodded in the opposite direction. "I'll get the evacuation started." Sarah checked her weapon. "You find out who's behind this." "Sarah," his voice stopped her as she turned to go. "If I don't." She crossed the space between them and pressed her lips to his scaled cheek. "Don't you dare die, Krax. We still haven't had that proper first date." Then she was running, not looking back to see his reaction. Her broken cuff hummed against her wrist, warm with stolen secrets. The path to the evacuation controls was surprisingly clear. Too clear. Sarah slowed as she approached the final door, her diplomatic instincts screaming trap. She was right. Ambassador Chen. Marshal Martinez stepped out of the shadows, looking exactly as she had when she'd recruited Sarah 3 years ago. "I was wondering when you'd figure it out. You sent the warning about the cipher." Sarah kept her weapon trained on her former mentor. "Why?" "Because I needed you to understand what you were carrying." Martine smiled sadly. "The quantum cipher isn't just data storage, Sarah. It's the key to rewriting history itself. Every diplomatic accord, every peace treaty, every alliance, all can be altered retroactively." "And what? You want to start a war." "I want to restore balance. Humans and drachnids working together." Martines laughed. "It's unnatural. Peace makes us weak. The cipher can change that. Make it so our species never trusted each other in the first place." Sarah's broken cuff burned against her skin. "You're insane." "I'm pragmatic. Now, hand over the cuff, and I'll make sure you're remembered as a hero who died trying to stop drachnid saboteurs." 5 minutes to core breach. Sarah thought of Krax, of his careful hands and glowing horns, of trust built in mere hours that felt stronger than years of diplomatic training. "No," she said. Martine sighed and raised her weapon. "Disappointing, but not surprising. You always were too idealistic." A shadow dropped from the ceiling behind Martine's, a shadow with glowing horns. "She's not idealistic," Krax said, his tail wrapping around Martinez's throat. "She's right." Martinez's weapon clattered to the floor. "How did you?" "Get to the evacuation controls," Krax told Sarah. "I found the rest of her team in central control. They won't be causing any more problems." Sarah ran to the control panel, her fingers flying over the interface. Quantum locks disengage. Evacuation protocols initiated. Throughout the station, pod bay doors began to open. The sound of launching escape pods filled the air. 4 minutes to core breach. "The cipher," Martines gasped against Krax's hold. "You don't understand its power." "I understand perfectly." Sarah approached them, holding up her broken cuff. "Krax." He raised his own half. As they brought the pieces together, quantum energy coursed between them. "What are you doing?" Martine struggled. That much quantum data could tear reality apart. Or, Sarah said, it could fix what you broke. She pressed her half of the cuff against Krax. Light exploded through the corridor, As quantum information cascaded between the pieces, Sarah felt Carax's free hand find hers as reality trembled around them. Then everything went white. Core breach in 3 minutes. Sarah opened her eyes to find herself still standing, still holding Carax's hand. Martinez lay unconscious at their feet. The broken cuffs had transformed into a single data crystal. Did it work? Carax asked. Sarah checked the nearest console. The Cipher's security protocols are exposed. We can prove everything. The sabotage, the conspiracy, all of it. 2 minutes to core breach. Carax's horns pulsed with urgency. We should probably continue this discussion in an escape pod. Probably. Sarah helped him secure Martinez. So about that date. Let's survive the next 2 minutes first. But his horns were glowing brighter than she'd ever seen them. Then we can discuss whether near-death experiences count as courtship. They ran for the last escape pod, the station counting down behind them. Sarah found herself smiling despite everything. After all, getting handcuffed to an alien and saving hundreds of lives while preventing an interstellar war wasn't the worst way to start a relationship. It might even make a good story to tell at their wedding. Assuming, of course, they survived the next 90 seconds. Unbound. The escape pod's viewport offered a perfect view of Omega Station's final moments. Sarah and Carax watched from the relative safety of space as the quantum core finally breached, turning the massive structure into a brief, brilliant star. 1 minute to minimum safe distance, the pod's AI announced. Martinez lay secured in the pod's storage compartment, the quantum data crystal safely locked in a containment field. Sarah felt Carax shift beside her, his scales brushing against her arm. "You're thinking too loud," he said. "Just wondering how many regulations we broke in the past 2 hours." Sarah leaned back in her crash sheet. Destruction of station property, unauthorized use of security protocols, quantum manipulation, unauthorized romantic overtures between species, Carax added. Sarah turned to face him, fighting a smile. "I don't remember that being in the diplomatic handbook." Chapter 7, Subsection 3. Proper conduct between representatives of different species. His horns pulsed with amusement. Though I don't think the authors considered the possibility of handcuffs. Minimum safe distance achieved, the AI announced. Beginning transmission to nearest Galactic Council outpost. Through the viewport, other escape pods were visible, their running lights bright against the void. All 300 station personnel, safe. Sarah felt something tight in her chest finally relax. "They're going to call an emergency session of the council," she said. "Someone will have to explain how the Cerulean's quantum cipher nearly caused an interstellar incident. Someone will have to explain why a human diplomat and a Drachnid security chief worked together to stop it." Carax's tail curled around her crash sheet. It might change everything. Everything's already changed. Sarah reached for his hand, marveling at how natural it felt now. "I'm pretty sure I'm never getting another diplomatic posting after this." Carax's mandibles clicked in what she now recognized as laughter. "And I doubt station security will be hiring me again soon." His golden eyes met hers. "We could always go into private security. I hear there's good money in protecting diplomats." "Is that your way of asking me to be your business partner?" "Among other things." His horns dimmed shyly. "Though perhaps we should start with dinner. I know a place in the Drachnid sector that serves both human and Drachnid cuisine. No handcuffs required." A transmission cut through their conversation. "This is Galactic Council vessel Swift Justice responding to emergency signals. Please identify yourselves." Sarah straightened in her seat, but didn't let go of Carax's hand. "This is Ambassador Sarah Chen, Earth Diplomatic Corps, with First Guardian Carax of Omega Station Security. We have a prisoner in custody and evidence of a conspiracy against multiple species. Request immediate secure transport to Council headquarters." There was a pause, then, "Acknowledged, Ambassador. Stand by for docking procedures." "Ready to face the politicians?" Carax asked. Sarah squeezed his scaled hand. "With you, always." even if they disapprove of interspecies relationships. Especially then, she grinned. After all, we've already proven we work well together under pressure. The rescue ship grew larger in their viewport, its docking arms extending. In the storage compartment, Martinez began to stir. Should we tell her we're dating now? Crax's horns brightened mischievously. It might be worse punishment than prison. Let's save something for the trial. Sarah watched as the docking procedure began. Besides, we haven't even had our first official date yet. About that, Crax turned to face her fully. There's an old Drachnid saying, life's greatest bonds are forged in fire. Are you saying nearly dying together multiple times means we're practically married by your standards? I'm saying. He leaned closer, his horns casting a soft glow between them. That sometimes the universe has interesting ways of bringing people together. Sarah closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his scaled ones. Just as the docking clamps engage, it wasn't a conventional kiss. Nothing about them was conventional, but it felt right. They separated as the airlock began to cycle. Martinez was definitely awake now, making disgusted noises from her compartment. Ready to change the galaxy? Crax asked, standing and offering her his hand. Sarah took it, feeling the warmth of his scales against her palm. As long as we're not handcuffed this time. No promises. His horns pulsed with affection. But next time, I'll buy you dinner first. The airlock opened to reveal a team of council security officers, all stopping short at the sight of a human and a Drachnid holding hands. Sarah straightened her ruined diplomatic uniform and smiled. Gentlemen, we have quite a story to tell you. Behind them, the remains of Omega Station drifted in space, a reminder that sometimes the greatest changes begin with a simple pair of handcuffs and an unexpected partnership. Crax's tail wrapped protectively around her waist as they prepared to face whatever came next. Together. After all, they'd already survived being handcuffed to each other. Everything else would be easy in comparison. Probably. The end.